aborting more than 1 of every 4 pregnancies, creating human clones, eliminating our elderly with euthanasia. Is this how we should deal with human life? Find out how you can make a difference in changing our culture in this edition of Life Matters. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has been a teacher at every academic level, from adult education and junior college down through high school, junior high, and even 5th and 6th grade. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters, your program on the right to life, on the culture that emanates from that idea and the battle of ideas that swirls around that culture, your culture. And if you're not aware that there's a battle of ideas raging right now, then you've already lost. If you're not aware that ideas that seek to implement a different view of what life is and what the right to life is result in the taking of innocent and vulnerable human lives. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important concept in this battle of ideas, the concept of eugenics. Eugenics literally means good genes. And it's been an idea, a philosophy that's been pushed basically since the end of the 19th century quite strongly. And while it has been held in disregard, particularly after the Nazi Holocaust, nevertheless, it's a concept that's very attractive to some. We're going to talk about it, why you need to understand it, particularly because science is continuing after the mapping of the human genome. Science is continuing to offer different tools. And these tools that deal with human genes actually are bringing us closer to implementing, once again, the practice of eugenics. Eugenics, the use of scientific methods to selectively breed human beings. We want to talk about that, just how pervasive and subtle that is, and why it is ethically wrong and dangerous. First, though, I want to talk a little bit about what's happened recently in Ireland. Those of you listening on radio know that we talked about the challenges in Ireland, the battle of ideas there, and the battle for the laws of Ireland. Ireland voted last week on the 25th of May to repeal the Eighth Amendment, which had guaranteed the right to life for a child in the womb. This was a very sad day for Ireland, and it became then the last country to have prohibited human abortions in Europe, and now it's joined with the rest of the EU. Just a brief commentary, it's very clear to me that that pressure of becoming part of the EU Borg, the EU collective, both culturally as well as legally, has been very, very strong in Ireland. And they have pushed Ireland, if you will, to adopt this worldview. Again, that particular battle for the ballot was superimposed by the Irish Parliament. But the Irish Parliament is extremely Eurocentric and in its ideology leans towards a Marxist view of humanity and a Marxist view of government. And we use that in the broadest sense. But in point of fact, it is a government which does not any longer, obviously, regard the value of a human life as something worthy of protecting, vulnerable human lives. And as that continues, we're very concerned what it means now for the push for euthanasia in the rest of Europe. Will that reach into Ireland? We'll see. But it was a sad day. That was May 25th of 2018. If you're listening on podcast, you can go back and you can hear an examination in depth of the Irish debate and the Irish question as it impacts all of Western civilization. Because in many ways, the regard for the human person is a bulwark of Western civilization. It's a defining aspect of what has made Western civilization what it is. And that's really what we talk about on Life Matters. We get into some of the news, we get into some of the issues, but in point of fact, what we're fighting for is our culture. We're fighting for what remains, if you will, of Western civilization. So your task is great. You've been given Western Civ. What are you going to do with it? Today we're talking about eugenics. And I had the opportunity in going to Ireland. I stopped in Iceland. There is wonderful pricing from a new airline, WOW Air. And you stop in Iceland. Next time I go, I'll spend more time on the island. But I did spend time at the Iceland airport, the airport outside of Reykjavik. And I spoke to some folks from Iceland. The reason is because Iceland now has proudly boasted it has eliminated Down syndrome. They've made a big splash last year that there's no Down syndrome in Iceland. You and I know how they did that. They did it by search and destroy testing, and they killed all children that had any sign of Down syndrome. So I had an interview there with some folks from Iceland, and we're going to have that a little bit later in this program. This program, we're talking about eugenics. And eugenics is basically a scientific approach, you might say, to the human person. And it started at the end of the 19th century. And it applied the principles of genetics. Now, genetics was deeply explored by an Augustinian friar by the name of Gregor Mendel. And he crossbred peas. And he saw how the traits of various peas could be passed along genetically. And eugenics is extrapolating from that botanical principle that genes are passed along. There are parents that pass along genetic traits. And that's obvious. That is an objective scientific fact. But what eugenics is the use of this knowledge for selective breeding, to selectively allow certain human beings to live and other human beings to not live. To declare that certain traits are the preferable desired human traits, and those who do not share those traits to be less human are not worthy of continued existence. So eugenics is an extremely dangerous concept, a concept that, if allowed to fully blossom, results in the arbitrary killing, albeit on scientific grounds, but the arbitrary killing of human beings. And that's what we see in Iceland. Again, when we come back, you can hear the interview in Iceland, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why eugenics is something that is insidious, is something that you can't see at first, but you must recognize if you're going to fight it in this battle of ideas.
If you have questions or comments for Life Matters, call 800-924-2490. Give us your name and the town you're calling from, and a quick question or comment. Life Matters continues after this.
The State Fair Political Practices Commission has now confirmed that billionaire businessman, pro-abortion progressive Michael Bloomberg is financing the Travis Allen attempt to divide the Republican Party. And it's expressly in writing. The purpose is to ensure there are only 2 Democrats on the fall ballot. That's right, Republicans will have no opportunities in the fall if this scheme of Travis Allen and Michael Bloomberg is carried out. Please vote for John Cox for governor. John Cox is against Planned Parenthood's funding by the deep state. You'll only have 2 Democrat, pro-abortion, deep state folks on the ballot if you vote for Travis Allen. Don't be snockered. Please vote for John Cox for governor. He is the man to stop the madness in Sacramento. This is paid for by the California Pro-Life PAC, not endorsed by any candidate.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Okay, well, we're back, and you're listening to Life Matters. We're talking about eugenics. We could easily spend several hours talking about eugenics. It's the idea of selective breeding by human beings and of human beings. And to distill it down to why it's dangerous, it's treating the human person as a thing. Just as Gregor Mendel treated peas and other plants as things, and he selectively bred them. You know, California, that was going on too. A great botanist was Luther Burbank, who in Santa Rosa had his gardens, and he was very significant in plant propagation and botanical studies. And genetics is a great thing, and it's applied to animals as well, in breeding of animals. But is it proper to apply it to the human person? And that's the question we have to look at. The philosophers, moral philosophers, have reduced moral questions down to a basic principle, and I'll quote Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant said, "Every human being should be treated as an end in themselves and never as a means to an end." And he called that the categorical imperative. In other words, that you don't treat people as things. And yes, we are heard on Christian radio, we're heard on talk radio, and I like that because we can bring Christian principles in and we can talk about them in a very public way that applies to all of culture. I think that's very important. So obviously the Christian principle is that we're made in the image of God. And as you know, being made in the image of God, the imago Dei, means that people should not be treated as objects or as the possession, the chattel of those that have the power to do so. That was the issue in slavery. Under slavery, certain human beings were considered chattel, to be used at whim and at will by the owner. So it's important to recognize that we live in a culture now where the battle of ideas and the battle of what science is incredibly important. Now, this is clearly a subset of our discussion on science. And if you want to go back in the podcast, we talk about science and the scientific method. Science is actually a great thing. And if you're listening on Christian radio, if you're a Christian, you know and should know that science is not something that should be feared. Science is a tool. If you're a secularist and you're listening, science is a tool. Science is not a source of truth any more than a toolbox is a source of truth. Science is a tool. It's a method for observing and understanding the universe that we live in. It's a great method. In fact, it was devised, buckle your seatbelts, it was devised by Christians. Science is actually the principle that we live in an ordered universe. And therefore, you can recognize the order that's placed in this universe. And even though Aristotle may have been one of the earliest to express it, even Aristotle said that the universe has been revealed to have an origin, a prime mover. That means the first person that did something. There is some purpose to this universe. We may not fully understand it, but you can observe it. That's also reflected in scriptures, that God has revealed himself through his visible creation so that we're all without excuse. Someone designed all of this. So science is a tool to observe this design, to understand it better, and to apply principles, just as you would in a toolbox, to apply those tools to a particular project, to understanding and accomplish things. A toolbox for mechanics, you could have a toolbox that might be metric and it might be SAE, and you use it for your cars. An automotive mechanic is really a form of scientist. And you have to be very precise. If you use the metric tools on the SAE cars, you might strip your lugs and do things improperly. But this is what you need to understand. Science is itself not evil. It's how it is used that is evil. Cars themselves are not evil. It's how they are used that can be evil. In Nice of 2017, at the New Year's celebration, a man took a very large truck, a lorry, they would call it in Europe and Britain, a very large semi-truck, and drove it down an avenue and killed many human beings. The truck is not evil. It's the use of that tool. It's the use of that truck. So science is not our enemy. Science is, in fact, our friend. And if you go back and again, listen to our podcast, but it's not the only place you can find it. Roger Bacon, really considered one of the founders of the modern scientific method. And then Francis Bacon, who was also a learned man in advanced science of observing nature. And again, even our founders, the founders of the American system of government, explicitly refers to the laws of nature and of nature's God, that you can discern what's appropriate for a government according to the laws of nature and of nature's God. So science is a tool for understanding. It's what you do with that tool that determines what's evil or good. There's one other aspect of this right now, though, and that is something called scientism. Scientism is the notion that science is more than a mere tool, that science is actually a moral imperative, that if something can be done, it should be done, that if something could be done, then it should be done, that if science can allow us to transplant heads from human beings one to another, then by all means we should do it, because science allows that. And scientism is a blind belief that science is more than merely a tool, but that somehow science brings with it a moral imperative, that it is a belief system in the empirical universe that whatever you can see and do gives you license to do it. And it is scientism that actually brings with it a great evil, because it removes moral obligation from us as individuals. As I said, it isn't just the Christian teachings. The moral philosophers have been very clear that when you treat a human being as a thing, you are violating a basic principle revealed in natural law, and that human beings need to be viewed as ends in themselves and not as means to an end. In eugenics, they become means to an end. In order to clean up the gene pool of Germany, the Nazis developed a system where they started killing certain human beings they did not want to reproduce. They were removed from society. Well, you're going to hear about that more now. It's much more subtle, and it seems much more benign when it's applied to certain genetic illnesses. That is to say, when there are certain genetic diseases. California has, in the Department of Health Services, a genetic disease branch. And you know what it does? It does exactly what's being done in Iceland. The genetic disease branch of the Department of Health in California actually issues tests for various genetic illnesses, including Down syndrome. You're going to see that in Iceland, they have now killed all Down syndrome children. So there are no children born with Down syndrome. While I was there, I did an interview with some folks at the Iceland airport. I asked probably 4 different people, and they didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to get their reaction, and they got kind of chill when I explained what the topic would be. Before I gave up, though, there was a young woman with a baby. She was there with her sister. And so I decided to approach it that way and struck up a friendly conversation. I told her that I just wanted her reaction. There was no judgment on my part. I just wanted to get her sense of what was going on a particular topic, and she assented to be recorded. And so you're going to hear from Maria and Iris. Listen to the interview. Again, these are very sweet people. They were on my flight to San Francisco and got along with them very well, but you can tell during the course of the conversation that they clearly did not like the fact that their nation was now known to be genetically pure, and that they had killed every child with Down syndrome they could find. And even Maria, who had just had her child, said that she herself would not do this. She could not see doing that, nor would her friends. But as I point out, well, somebody has. Someone was willing to do that. And you know, that's often what we hear about abortion. You hear from people, I would never personally have an abortion, but who am I to prevent others? And so there's a sense of moral superiority to what is clearly a moral outrage. What even Immanuel Kant says is the treating of a human being as a means to an end, as cleaning up the gene pool, as removing problems from society. That's eugenics. And eugenics is very much an ideology that's used with abortion. If you talk to people who support abortion, there is a subtle eugenics flavor to what they're suggesting. It's probably better that child not be born. It's better for society. It's better somehow for that child that they be killed. So this is an insidious ideology. It's very present. And you're going to hear in just a moment from Maria and Iris.
To follow Life Matters on all social media, go to lifematters.life. Life Matters continues after this.
The State Fair Political Practices Commission has now confirmed that billionaire businessman, pro-abortion progressive Michael Bloomberg is financing the Travis Allen attempt to divide the Republican Party. And it's expressly in writing. The purpose is to ensure there are only 2 Democrats on the fall ballot. That's right, Republicans will have no opportunities in the fall if this scheme of Travis Allen and Michael Bloomberg is carried out. Please vote for John Cox for governor. John Cox is against Planned Parenthood's funding by the deep state. You'll only have 2 Democrat, pro-abortion, deep state folks on the ballot if you vote for Travis Allen. Don't be snockered. Please vote for John Cox for governor. He is the man to stop the madness in Sacramento. This is paid for by the California Pro-Life PAC, not endorsed by any candidate.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Okay, we are at the airport outside of Reykjavik. And your name?
Maria.
Maria.
Yes.
And Maria has a baby. What's the baby's name?
Gudmundur.
Gudmundurs?
Gudmundur, yes.
Gudmundur. Okay.
Typical Icelandic name.
Is it good to know?
Yeah.
And this is?
Iris, her
Iris?
sister.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And where are you going?
San Francisco.
So am I.
Oh, nice.
Yes, we'll see you there.
Yeah.
Now, this is a sensitive issue, so don't you take it personally.
Okay.
But several months ago, your Minister of Health announced that there's no more Down syndrome. There's no more Down syndrome in Iceland. Mm-hmm. Did you hear about that?
Yes.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts about that, since you have a baby?
I don't know. I think it's just hard. It's hard and very expensive to have a kid that has a Down. And I think it's very good that people can know about it before. So they do a test. They do a blood test.
Yeah.
To the mother to see if the fetus has a Down syndrome or not. And of course, it's always up to her to have an abortion or not.
Okay.
And I have not heard about any of my friends who have had abortion knowing that, or willingly want to have an abortion after knowing that they have a kid that has a Down.
Do you know anyone who's kept a Down syndrome baby?
No, but I've never even heard about
that.
I'm sorry?
No, I've never heard of that.
Okay. So, in one sense, he was right that there is no more Down syndrome in Iceland.
Yeah, but probably just saying something.
Yes.
Well, it was a big press statement, yeah.
But I think because they did this test on me, and I remember I got a feeling that I immediately thought that it didn't matter if it had a Down syndrome or not. I just wanted to know it before or not. But I always wanted to have that child. It doesn't matter. Okay. It's always your child.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, you're a mom.
Yeah. And
right.
this was before I was a mom, so it is a strong feeling.
Right.
So I don't think it matters.
Yes. So one of the things that coincidentally happened was the French Supreme Court actually prohibited advertisements on television that showed Down syndrome children in a positive light. And the reason is because the Down Syndrome Association of France was putting television spots on showing Down syndrome children and how wonderful they were, that they are lovable. And they really are. If you know any Down syndrome people, they're very, very loving, very kind. And I know this because I was expensive for my parents. Every child's expensive.
Yes.
Every child's expensive. But there is a phenomenon that's happening. So literally now, in France, you're not allowed to give a positive view of a Down syndrome child. So what I find interesting is that was just 2 months before your Minister of Health made that announcement. So I'm thinking that there is a concerted effort for, you might say, perfecting society by having only perfect children. But it does have kind of a
Black side.
It has a black side. Yeah. Yeah, it makes you stop and wonder.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite scary.
It is quite scary. The scariest thing is when it's a government program. When obviously, as you said, you would like to keep your child. But often there is peer pressure and social pressure. And then when there's government pressure, the idea that, well, you're going to cost us a lot of money. And we really don't want you doing that, having this Down syndrome child. It does seem a little bit orchestrated. And the use of government to cull certain babies it's kind of scary. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for that information, and he's just really cute. That was Maria and Iris, her sister, two young women from Iceland talking about what's happening with Down syndrome, or rather what's not. Because in fact, Maria said that if she, while having her child, if that test had tested positive, she likes to think she would love the child anyways. And I think every mother has that sentiment. Here's the problem. No mother that had that result accepted that child. And that's what Iceland was celebrating, that literally every Icelandic mother had been convinced to say no to that particular life. And that is an insidious situation, a government-sponsored program. Again, they do have socialized medicine, socialized healthcare, and that brings even more pressure into difficult circumstances. You need to know that eugenics is an attitude of mind, that the leading eugenicist of the 20th century, Margaret Sanger, was in fact the founder of Planned Parenthood, yes, the world's largest owner of abortion clinics, and that abortion is routinely used as a way of cleaning genetic populations, as a way of disposing of certain people, as a condescending view of other human beings. Eugenics is insidious, and you must recognize it for what it is. This has been a more somber program. We do have some other upbeat ones coming, so don't let it get you down. You just need to recognize the battle of ideas and be willing to fight in that battle to protect those that can't protect themselves. If you're listening on podcast, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes and rate us there. We appreciate it very much. You're listening to Life Matters.
To subscribe to the Life Matters podcast, go to lifematters.life, where you'll find out a lot more about life, culture, and the battle of ideas. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life. Wherever you are in the nation, you can find out more at National Right to Life. You can find vital pro-life information and also find the access to your state and local Right to Life affiliate. Get informed and get involved.